Bonjour, ici Jean-Serge Moulumba de la chaîne JSM Instant Coaching. Aujourd'hui, une interview exclusive avec Matt THORNTON, le créateur de SBG Worldwide, c'est-à-dire plus de 50 clubs affiliés autour de la planète. Il y en a en Australie, il y en a en Asie, il y en a en Europe, il y en a aux États-Unis, il y en a partout. Matt THORNTON, c'est un personnage visionnaire à la démarche complètement révolutionnaire depuis la fin des années 80. Il a mis tout son effort à construire un système de simplicité, d'efficience et portant au plus proche de la vérité, système qui convient parfaitement aux athlètes de haut niveau. Tout le monde connaît Conor Mcgregor qui fait partie du système SBG. Il convient également aux coachs de renom comme John Kavanagh. Il convient parfaitement aux forces de l'ordre ou même aux personnes comme vous et moi qui, tout simplement, cherchons des méthodes de self-défense ou alors des pratiques de bien-être au moyen d'arts martiaux fonctionnels. Matt THORNTON, je trouve qu'il gagne à être connu en France comme dans les milieux francophones parce que son travail est exceptionnel. Il m'a dit que le seul contact qu'il avait avec la France était la Réunion. Il avait été ici en France dans les années 90. Voilà, je trouve que son rôle est important et je vous laisse apprécier cette interview. Mais avant, pensez à vous abonner à la chaîne, pensez à liker, pensez à partager le contenu autour de vous. C'est important, ça me permet de faire grandir la chaîne pour vous, pour plus de valeur, plus de contenu. Voilà. Hey, hello Matt, how are you doing? Can you hear me? You can?
There we go. There we go.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, good.
What was the problem?
Yeah, no, I think I had it on mute. I didn't realize that you have to actually
Okay. Wonderful. Oh, this is awesome. So I'm really thrilled about this interview. First of all, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine. Today I'm
Good.
just realizing uh, quite of a dream talking to you.
Well, thank you very much. Tell me, where are you? Where are you located?
I'm located in France,
Okay.
South France.
Okay.
Actually, by searching your information, I saw that you conducted a seminar here in France.
Yeah.
Where was it?
Oh
Because I
boy,
couldn't find any information about that.
yeah, no, that would have been probably 1997 or 8. It was a long time ago.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, when you're, I don't speak French, but when you're, when the Zoom meeting was coming up, it said something about reunion, and I used to go to Reunion Island quite a bit.
Okay. 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 You
Uh,
don't have any contact with France anymore.
no, unfortunately not. I do have my friends in Reunion Island that I talk to, which is a French island, but I don't have anybody on the mainland that I
Wow.
talk
Okay.
to.
So I don't know where to start because it's so many things with you. So first of all, I came on your material by following Rokas
Okay,
because I am also not that much anymore, but I am also an Aikido practitioner.
okay,
And by following him, he led me to you, and your system is huge because it made me step back from Aikido, and I got involved to BJJ more.
okay, good.
But as you said on your multi podcast, SBG is not only about BJJ. It's not
Right.
only about combat sport. It's about truth.
Yes.
And I told you at the beginning that it was like a dream coming true because the motto of one tribe, one vibe resonates so much to me. So when I
Good.
first wrote you, I thought to myself, with this kind of high standards, he would come back to you. I know because I know you're a man of value. So I'm so happy to have you here. And my first question would be, how does it feel like to be Matt THORNTON today, starting? Okay, the system had to reboot. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, the system had to reboot, so I couldn't do anything about that. I had to
No problem.
wait. I'm sorry
I've been
about
doing,
that.
that's okay. I've been doing a lot of podcasts, and this happens with
Okay.
technology.
Okay, thank you so much. So I was asking the question about aliveness, which is
Mhm.
the pillar of your system, actually,
Yes.
because of the epistemology and the way you define functional martial arts from you separate functional martial arts from other martial arts. Uh, in these times and age, why do you think, because I've researched also other websites defining martial arts, why do you think this is not so common in other different associations? Why?
I think that fantasy-based martial arts exist to this day for the same reason that we still have things like astrology, right? So
Mm,
it depends on what motivates people. If someone is not motivated by uh, the truth in whatever the particular subject is, so the truth about how the stars in the universe work, or the truth about how two human beings, how you can defend yourself against another aggressive human being, if that's not their motivating, if that's not what drives them and motivates the volition to go out there and train, then they'll pick something that caters to what they really want. And so you're always going to see fantasy-based martial arts, just like I think we'll always have things like astrology or certain superstitions, because
okay.
for the same reasons.
Hmm. And what do you think is the role of leaders in this environment? The leaders of all these other martial arts. Do you think they play something also? Because people would search for it, and what do the leaders would play as a role in this category?
Right. So I've had people say to me over the years that, why do you bother having that conversation? Because if people are going to do what they want to do anyway, and if someone decides to go out and fool themselves by doing something silly, then they're just going to do that. But the reality is, some people do get misled. So they might actually be sincerely looking for self-defense
Mm,
or
mm,
something like that.
mm,
And they don't know how to tell the difference between something that's functional and something that's not functional. In the same way that, for example, Do you remember back in the 70s, there was a very famous psychic named Uri Geller?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm,
And he had a lot of PhDs full. He had world leaders
mm,
that were
mm,
coming to him for advice. And the reality is he was a very like technically poor magician.
mm,
And when other magicians like Johnny Carson and the Amazing Randy and they could see what he was doing and
mm,
replicate it, understood immediately what he was doing.
mm,
But because those other people, they were very smart people,
mm,
but they didn't know magic, it was
mm,
very easy for them to be misled. And so aliveness is a way of giving people their own bullshit detector
mm,
that they can then apply and use so that they don't get misled if that's what they don't want to be misled.
mm, mm. Do have you encountered people that have come and discovered aliveness and then went back to their previous system? Have you encountered those kind of people?
Very rarely. I've seen it happen a few times, and these aren't people that really came to us and trained, but people who I know understood aliveness, that I've had conversations with them, and still go back and teach the other thing to their students. And in every case, that was related to money. So
Mm,
they were making quite a bit of money doing what they were doing, and they didn't want to let that go.
mm.
That, or status and prestige. It's hard for someone to have invested 20 or 30 years of their life in something
It
and
was
then
hard
turn
for
around and go, man, that was all a bunch of bullshit. You know?
me. It was
So it
very
takes,
hard for me. When I saw
yeah,
you, I didn't know how to think about it. It was hard. It's still hard. It's still hard
yes,
because I have the feeling that I can't just imagine that I've wasted all that time. It's still hard. It's still painful,
yeah,
but that's how the truth works.
yeah. And that's why actually when I first came across, I can't remember, to be honest, how I came across Rokus's videos. He may have, I don't know if he messaged me first or I messaged him first. I don't remember.
Mm,
But I remember that after I first talked to him, I went back and looked at his video and I saw that he went and worked with an MMA guy and
mm,
he actually tried to test his material.
yeah.
So that number one told me he was sincerely looking for the truth.
Mm,
And then when he recognized what was happening, he changed. And so I think even the very first conversation I ever had with Roke is I was sincerely complimenting him on that. You know, that to me,
mm,
that showed a lot of character.
mm, mm, mm. And for you, for example, if you were, because I don't know, like I imagine this, that you are in the front of a bunch of proficient, I don't know, Aikidoka, because that's the word I know. What would you
Right.
tell them today? What would you tell them?
The exact same thing that I say on video. I don't sugarcoat the message for anybody. I remember one time, for example, many years ago, I was in Northern Ireland
Mm,
and I had done a seminar for a group of traditional martial artists,
mm,
and they realized, you know, aliveness, and they liked what we were doing, what I was doing, and they
mm,
were talking about wanting to maybe come on board and start training,
mm.
and they had some questions they wanted to ask me, so they had me sitting in a chair.
Okay.
Uh, and then across from me was a whole line of these guys. There was like 10 of them, and I told them very bluntly that, you know, you can't do both and be part of the organization. If you have to, I mean, you can do that if you want for exercise or however there's nothing wrong with doing it, but you have to be honest with people. You have to tell people the truth, and it's going to be hard for you guys to get better if you don't let go of all this stuff. I realize you've been training for a long time and you have these black belts and things, but when you come to my class and learn jujitsu, you're going to have to put on a white belt.
Mm.
And I was very open and sincere with them. Of course, that was the last time I ever trained with those guys.
Okay.
But you just got to tell the truth no matter what, right?
Mm, wow. Wow. And for example, for today, we're in 2020. Some people are going to watch this and then are going to want to make one decision to go another to one direction, functional martial arts or traditional martial arts. The problem is with traditional martial arts, as I saw with Aikido, they claim to be also modern martial art. Nobody says we're traditional. They just say we are here for many. We've been here for many years, but
Right.
we're modern. We're modern martial arts. So,
Right.
how would you now make the difference between what is really functional and what is not at the beginning when you have to make your decision?
Yeah, I think that the way to make those kind of decisions and the way to determine what's functional, what's not functional, is the same in martial arts as it is in any other empirical study. So what you have to do, if we're talking about critical thinking or we're talking about science, it's not the answer that's important. It's the way that you arrived at that answer. It's not the conclusion that matters as much as how did you arrive at that conclusion. And if you understand how to arrive at that conclusion, again, this goes back, and we're talking about epistemology. If you understand the epistemology and you understand how to arrive at the conclusion, then you or anyone else, myself, all of us, we can make those decisions on our own because we know how. And so that's why I always start with aliveness. And if somebody understands aliveness, they will on their own be able to differentiate relatively quickly what works and what doesn't work. And then they can carve their own path through martial arts or any other subject.
How would you, going from that, how would you define a true martial artist today? What is a true martial artist apart this point of aliveness?
Sure. I think a true martial artist is somebody who is sincere, who tells the truth, and who is working in one way or another with functional martial arts. So they're working with real martial arts, and also is maintaining a certain level of character and dignity and respect for other human beings. So that would be the way I would differentiate between a true martial artist and somebody who is just, for example, a fighter. So you could be a fighter and train in MMA, and but if you're still treating people poorly, if you're not conducting yourself in a manner that shows dignity for yourself and other people, then I probably wouldn't apply the term martial artist to you. But there's no reason why people can't do both. And I know a lot of people who train functional martial arts who also maintain an environment where everybody feels welcome, where everybody's treated well, where everybody's treated with dignity, where things like character and how you represent yourself matter. And so they're not mutually exclusive in any way, shape, or form. And I think to be a martial artist, you have to have the combination of both. You have to be doing something that's a real martial art, and you also have to be conducting yourself and just as importantly, making sure that your students conduct themselves in a manner that treats other people with respect.
Okay. So in one of your podcasts, you were asking to John Kavanagh, you were asking what was the number one point he would consider to define a coach ability, and he answered. He said his ability to build a proper environment where everybody can make mistakes.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
But we didn't hear you about that. What do you think?
Oh, I agree with him. So, to me, everybody in a martial arts school, in a functional martial arts academy or gym, is going to have their role to play. And to me, the head instructor, if you're the head instructor or head coach of that particular facility, the most important thing you do is create the culture that defines that facility. And that includes everything. But primarily what it means is you're creating an environment in terms of physical martial arts. What it means is you're creating an environment where people feel safe to be vulnerable. So people can come onto the mat, feel safe, to be physically vulnerable. You can come on the mat and they're going to have to roll with conditions to punch them in the face, to potentially break a limb. And if people don't feel comfortable allowing themselves to go into vulnerable positions over and over and over again so that they can get good, because functional martial arts require failing over and over and over again, then you're going to have an environment where that's not healthy. And so what John has to do, John Kavanagh, for his fight team, is he has to create an environment where the fighters can come in, they can be safe, and they can focus on their weaknesses, and they can train without getting injured, without worrying about getting injured or worrying about getting hurt. And so that way they can really start to develop their skill. And everything else, all the other things John does, and he does a lot of things fantastic because he's a world-class coach, but everything else he does is second to that, because without that, nothing else he does is gonna matter as much, right?
Okay. Oh, that's impressive. Okay, so going from that, how would you define a good gym and a bad gym?
Sure. So going back to what I just said, I think the first most important piece of having a good gym is making sure that people are safe. So that's number one. So if you walk in there and people are getting hurt, then that's not a good gym. It doesn't matter if they're good at martial arts. It doesn't matter if they're good at fighting. If people are getting injured, it's totally counterproductive, because our goal should be to build people up. We want to make weak people stronger. We want to make people healthier. So if people are getting injured is where it's counterproductive. It's counter to the mission, so to speak. So number one, they have to be safe, and number two, be comfortable. So, and for me personally, I want to have a gym where everybody feels comfortable, where not only athletic men, but women and kids and families and older people, someone that maybe has been working on a desk job for the last 15 years and has never run, for like 10 years, can walk in, and we can then build that person up to the point where they can take these arts to whatever level they want to take them to. To me, that's very, very important. That'd be the second piece. So the first piece is it's safe. Second piece is we're building people up and people feel welcome. Everyone feels welcome. And then the third piece is just being technically good at your job, being a good craftsman, to where you can actually help people learn the martial arts in an efficient way. So, being a good coach would be that, or good teacher would be that third piece.
What do you think, going from that, what do you think of very diligent, competent competitors just transitioning from competition to teaching? Because you said that coaching, teaching, and competitors have so different skills. What do you think of all the people doing that?
Well, I think it's great. The more people that teach, the better. But they are very different skills. So, being a world-class competitor, being a good teacher, being a good corner man, doing what John does, for example, John Kavanagh, when he's working in the corner with one of his fighters like Conor, being able to evaluate people and look at them and see, if we're talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what belt level you think they're at, right? All those things are actually somewhat separate skills, and some of them are very different. So being a good competitor and being a good teacher aren't really related in any way. And oftentimes the great competitors can be the worst teachers, because many of them are also gifted athletes, and they have not had, up to that point anyway, they have not had either the time or the mental, put the mental work in to break down why they're so good at what they do. There's certain things, so there's a lot of aspects to their movement that they may just take for granted because they've always been able to apply it that way. And those competitors, some of them I see come off the mat and they stop competing, and then they start really thinking about why they were able to do what they do so well. They can become great teachers. And I can think of Rickson Gracie is like that. When you get to work with him one-on-one, he's a phenomenal coach. But that's because I think after Rickson stopped fighting, he spent quite a bit of time asking himself, and I can see the same thing with Roger Gracie now. Roger, from what I've never worked with him in person, but what I see on his videos, he seems to be a very good coach. And I think what he's doing now is he's thinking about why his jiu-jitsu worked the way it worked. So, but I do think it's important for people to recognize their separate skills. And if you want to be a good teacher and take pride in being a good teacher, then you have to put forward some effort in learning how to teach. Just like if you want to be a competitor, you have to put forward some effort in being able to physically do the art.
Oh, that's interesting. So, wow. Going from that, I would ask this question. Well, if a teacher is competent into teaching,
Mm-hmm.
um, competitors compete. Would you agree with this claim saying that we only focus on one in combat sports? We only focus on one area, which is grappling, for example, and we cannot focus on so many different areas like we see the tendency in the MMA environment. What do you say about that?
For a teacher or for a competitor?
For a teacher.
It depends. So back when MMA first started, what you saw were specialists, right? So you'd see Hoist Gracie, who's really only good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Hoist can't really box well and didn't have a lot of wrestling. Or you'd see Randy Couture, who when he first fought in the UFC, his first UFC, he was really Greco-Roman wrestling. Randy had done very little boxing, and to my knowledge, I don't think he'd done any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at that point. So he was all wrestling. Or Maurice Smith, if you remember Maurice Smith back in the day, a kickboxer from in Washington State. Great kickboxer, just a tiny bit of wrestling, right? Tiny bit of jiu-jitsu. But now the sport has the new generation of younger fighters that are coming up, many of whom have been in the gym since they were, 14 or 15 years old, and they're now 23, 24. Those men and women are good at all of it and have trained MMA almost as if MMA is an art in and of itself. And so, long story short, to be a great teacher, a great coach, and I'll use John again, or let me use one of my other SBG coaches, Adam Singer, who was Forrest Griffin's coach. To be a coach at that level, you have to be able to teach MMA as its own art and be able to teach all of it at once. But you also really have to have a deep understanding of the individual aspects. So Adam's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in addition to being a great MMA coach. John is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who, in addition to being a good MMA coach. And so I think you need both. And with an art like Jiu-Jitsu, although I could say this about stand-up as well, or wrestling as well, any one of these pieces that we use in MMA, you could spend a lifetime just working that, right? You could spend a lifetime doing wrestling and never, just the fundamentals of wrestling, and never even scratch the surface of what could be done, or boxing or jiu-jitsu. So, but I think, I guess that's my long-winded way of saying now in the year 2020, to be a good MMA coach, you really do have to have both. You can't just be a specialist. You have to know all of it, stand up, clinch, and ground.
Oh, okay. That's wonderful. So going from that, there is no place, but you say that there's so much to learn in this standing and wrestling and grappling. So much to learn on each of those areas. There is no time to waste in any different fake martial art if you want to grow and be competent in MMA. And diving into BJJ, what do you think? We know the system of aliveness is great, but there are some people claiming here and there that the concept-based teaching is better than technique-based teaching, or vice versa. What is your opinion on that?
Well, we have a very particular way of philosophy about that at SBG, and so it's a combination of both. I think of it kind of like if you're a good chef, right? You have to have the right ingredients. That's the technique. But you also have to have the right epistemology, the right training method. That might be the way you cook it, right? And to get a good meal, you have both. So you do have to have the correct techniques, the most efficient techniques possible, and an understanding of how those techniques work. And for us at SBG, those techniques are going to be always just fundamentals. And when I say the word fundamentals, I'm not talking about what's most basic. I'm talking about what's most important. And that's the structure that underlies jiu-jitsu or wrestling or striking that makes those arts work. And there's an infinite way that those arts can express themselves. But underlying each one of those athletes, you could have 10 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts who have completely different, or competitors who have completely different styles and games. But underlying that, they all have the same structure of the fundamentals of Jiu-Jitsu that allow them to play the game at that level. And so SBG, our curriculum is focused solely on fundamentals. And I believe by doing that, I give people maximum freedom to express themselves, and then trained in an alive way, which means when we use the word drill, we're not talking about repetition and technique, but we're talking about training with aliveness in a way that's safe so people don't get injured, but will also have a potential, a factor where they fail, because failure is an essential part of that process. And so during the round, they're going to fail, and then they have to overcome those failures by working more and drilling more, and then you move on to the next thing, which we call the I method. So you need both. You need to have a solid understanding of the movements themselves, which in SBG for us, it's just going to be fundamentals. And then that's focused and taught in a way that's alive. And when you have both those things, you're going to create people who are good.
Okay. Have you seen anywhere else some people doing maybe not as great as you, but a kind of good things? Your system is so particular, so I can't see anywhere else.
Well, I know, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that
there are also many associations there, but according to you, who is doing a great job also out there?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great coaches out there that world-class coaches. So
with a system of a methodology that you can also approve.
Yeah, I don't know of many other associations that focus as much on epistemology and have put as much thought into it as we do. So the thing about SBGs, a lot of the other jiu-jitsu associations or organizations, they're a group of people who are gathered around a competitor, usually, and then they form a team, and then they compete for that team. SBG is a little bit different in that it's a group of people that are gathered around a set of principles. And so every one of the coaches that's part of the organization believes in those principles and has put a lot of thought and thoughtfulness into what they do. And so that makes it a little bit unique. But that's not to say that there's not amazing coaches in all the different arts that are out there. It's just that as an association, I think we're a little bit unique in the fact that that's what keeps us. It's actually the principles themselves that unite us, as opposed to a personality or something like that.
Which makes you relevant not only in sports but also in military systems and everything, because when we consider the way the sports go, as Rickson says, people are just playing in a box. They miss a huge part of principles beyond the sport. And going from that point, Rickson says also maybe sport tends to reduce the applicability of BJJ. How do you see it going further and further down this path? Do you see something will grow better than what we're just experiencing right now? But now it's the lockdown, but how do you see it going with the sport environment?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the fundamentals. If your school focuses on the fundamentals, let's just talk, I'll use jiu-jitsu for sake of simplicity. If we're talking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu. If a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school, it truly is focused around the fundamentals of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, then their students should be able to train with a gi on, with a gi off, in MMA, in self-defense applications, and they should be able to go back and forth between those different venues and be fine. You know, it takes some adjustment when someone's trying to hit you, or it might take some mild adjustments in terms of understanding the differences in grips, but essentially your game is going to be there still. And if your game falls apart, or you know, a large percentage of it doesn't apply if you put the gi on, or you take the gi off, or won't work when you're getting slapped in the head or hit in the head, then what you're doing is not fundamental. And so as long as you're training fundamental jiu-jitsu and you're teaching fundamental jiu-jitsu, then I believe very strongly that your students should be able to defend themselves, be able to enter into the MMA arena if they want to try that, be able to compete in IBJJF jiu-jitsu tournaments and do fine. Now, having said that, there's people who want to specialize, and there's a lot of schools who want to focus on just IBJJF, and that's fine. And there are other schools who don't care at all about gi jiu-jitsu, and their jiu-jitsu's there solely for MMA. And that's fine too. But for us at SBG, it's always been about fundamentals, and which is why you'll see coming out of our gyms all the above. You'll see jiu-jitsu competitors who medal at competitions and do really well. You'll see coaches, SBG coaches, who train primarily with the police and military applications. And you'll see world-class MMA coaches like John Kavanagh or Adam Singer or Chris Connolly, our coach out of Alabama now, who always has several people in the UFC. And they can do all of it. A student could go, for example, to Chris's gym in Birmingham, and they could learn jiu-jitsu and go compete at an IBJJF tournament and do really well. They could go fight in the cage and do really well. And they could defend themselves if they were attacked, because when they go to Chris's gym, they're going to be able to learn how to do all of it because they're focused on those fundamentals. So that's one of the reasons why I've always believed fundamentals are so important. Not only do I think it's the fastest way to get better, to grow, to learn, it's also, it allows the students and the coaches to do all of the above.
Okay. That's the reason why you also say you don't care when teaching BJJ, you don't care about the submissions. First, you have to learn fundamentals. Submissions, you don't care about them. Okay.
Yeah, and when I'm teaching, for example, it doesn't matter what level the students are. So when I do seminars, very often now, there's going to be multiple black belts on the mat. And then also there'll be white belts there who they'll come up to me and say, hey, I've just started a week ago, and this is my first jiu-jitsu lesson. And I'm like, that's fine. It's not going to make any difference. They're gonna both learn from my class or from really any class that any of the SBG coaches teach, because
there is no level in teachings.
Exactly, because the fundamentals are the same for everybody.
Wow, this is quite it's quite astounding. Okay, I've never experienced it, but I am eager to experience it. But going from that, this seems to me to be very huge to implement in a gym. But is it very complicated to implement in a gym? This kind
is
of
it complicated to implement it?
Yeah.
No, I think it just takes some training. So all of our coaches at the gym go through. Anybody that's teaching at one of our schools goes through an instructor training program.
Okay.
Right. Just because they get a purple belt or a brown belt or even a black belt doesn't mean that they can teach.
Okay.
So we start our students pretty early on in the process, usually around blue belt, if it's something they're interested in, teaching something they want to do. We start teaching them how to teach. Okay. And then in addition, of course, they're taking my class. Yeah. And so that by the time they start their own class, they have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
That makes me think a lot. So for you, the environment is.
Are you still there? Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And for you, the environment is first safety and then comfortable, and then people will choose. For you, the point of having options is very important for the students on the mat. Not going because you make a distinction between style delivery system, and the methodology. So
Yes.
style is individual, and then
Yes.
wait, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So for something to be a fundamental in jiu-jitsu or in striking or in clinch, it's going to transcend era, the time period. It's going to transcend geography. It's going to transcend individual bodies, human bodies. It's going to transcend venue. It's going to transcend uniform. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if I said, hey, we're going to work today on Canadian geometry, you knew right away that that's ridiculous, right? Because how could there be Canadian geometry? But so it is. But so it is with a rear naked choke, right? The fundamentals behind how to best cut off the blood supply to someone's head when you're behind them and using your arms are well known, and we know how to do that. And they're the same if you're a 110-pound woman as they are if you're a 270-pound man, if you're wearing a gi or if you're not wearing a gi, in the cage, in a self-defense situation, or if you're in law enforcement in the military. None of those things are going to change the mechanics of how you apply that choke. So that's a fundamental. Now, getting into the position to do the choke, the setup you use, the timing you use, the rhythm you have, the pace that you go at during the match, during the bout, during the fight, those are unique and will be different for every single human being, and that's your individual style. And so at my gym, I'll focus on fundamentals, and then the students will, through the process of a live drilling and rolling, sparring, develop over years, they develop their own style. And the nice thing about if you're training at a gym that truly does know how to teach the fundamentals, by the time students get to be blue and purple belt, they are going to be completely different. In fact, it'd be hard for you to find two purple belts that had similar games because people are so unique. Whereas if you go to a school that teaches different in the opposite way of what I'm advocating, and they teach on a technique by technique basis, like you do this, they counter, then you do this, and you do this, or where the instructor teaches his or her own style, what they happen to be good at, then what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of those students look exactly the same. They're trying to do the same guard pass, their instructor's guard pass. They're trying to do the same chokes, their instructor's chokes. And not only do I think that's a slower, less efficient way to learn, I also think that in the long run, you produce athletes and competitors that are not only worse, but aren't going to be able to transcend the different environments. They're kind of boxed in. And so individual style is always your individual expression of the art. And underlying that individual expression of the art, if you truly are good at the art, will be a solid understanding of the mechanical fundamentals based in physics that make that art work.
And going from that, what is your idea on the belt system? Because if everyone can just learn fundamentals, what makes the difference between how do you determine what is the ranks? What are the ranks?
Right. So the belt system in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu doesn't bother me. And the reason why it doesn't bother me is because in a proper Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, and I think, the majority of them are, you can't fake being a particular belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu any more than you can fake being able to speak French or being able to play the guitar. So if I told you, hey, I'm a pretty good speaker in French.
Yeah. Comment allez-vous, monsieur?
Yeah, exactly. I have no idea. And so it is with Jiu-Jitsu. So in that sense, the belt in Jiu-Jitsu is just a physical representation of that particular skill level. And that makes it really useful for competitions. So, it would not be fair to put a blue belt up against, for example, a brown belt. If you had the two, because understanding the techniques of Jiu-Jitsu does really make a huge difference. So it'd be very, very hard for a blue belt to ever compete against a brown belt. So that helps separate them out for competition. And also, it's an art that for the average person who has a job and a family and a life that they have to keep doing and can only train, say, 2 or 3 days a week, and most of those training sessions are going to be 2 hours at the most. And so you're talking about the average person getting, if they're lucky, maybe 5 or 6 hours a week of jiu-jitsu. And at that pace, for most people, it takes 10 to 12 years to get a black belt. And so being able to acknowledge someone's progress in a way that's meaningful, that can't be faked, along the way, along that 10 or 12 years, is useful both for competition and also just to let people know they are advancing and to keep them understanding that they're actually doing well. Because a lot of times what I see with students is after a few years in jiu-jitsu, they might think, man, I'm not really learning. I'm not getting any better. But what they don't realize is the people that they're training with are getting better too, right? So they're measuring themselves. They're a moving train that's measuring themselves against another moving train, and they never really feel like they're seeing any progress. So sometimes a coach to come in and say, actually, you've advanced to where I think you're now going to be competing. You should be competing in this division. It can be helpful to keep people going along the way.
People claim sometimes that it's relevant to compete in order to advance. Do you agree with that also?
Yes and no. So it's absolutely essential that they compete in the gym all the time. So the opponent process, rolling in jiu-jitsu, you can't get good at jiu-jitsu without that. So you wouldn't, not only would I not give someone a belt if they hadn't done that, they wouldn't ever be able to legitimately become a blue belt without doing that. So competing in the gym with your training partners is an essential part of the process. Competing publicly in a tournament in front of an audience is completely optional. I think it's good for people to experience it once or twice. If it's something that frightens them, usually because of the audience, and can make people nervous, then I think it's good to try and overcome that. But it's not essential. You can have great black belts who've never done anything in that tournament environment. And you can have people that, like I mentioned earlier, who have competed fantastic in that tournament environment and can't really teach or break down what they do in the gym. So
competition is not relevant in the advancement system. Competition officially, but in the gym, it's imperative.
Correct. With your training partners and with your peer groups, it's an essential part of the process. Whether or not you're doing it in a stadium for medals, totally optional.
Is it something that you've always? Is it something that you've always described so, or is it a conclusion that you've reached?
Yeah, I mean, I have at this stage, I think 30 of my own black belts, somewhere around there. And some of them have competed a lot, like tons, and they've medaled a lot and done really well. And others have really never competed, or maybe more likely competed once or twice in their life. Sure, yeah, in a tournament. And when the two of them are matched up in the gym, they're fairly equal and can go back and forth. And one of them may even be a better coach. So I don't think competing publicly in a tournament for medals has anything to do really with how good your jiu-jitsu really is. But having said that, I think it's a good thing to experience. And for a lot of people, as long as they don't mistake doing well in that tournament for being a superior human being to other people, I think it's a positive thing for people to do.
And you personally, did you compete a lot? You personally?
Did I compete?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple times, though, not very often. So I competed 1994 or 96 was the first time, and that was in a tournament in LA that Hickson put on, and when I was a blue belt. And then I competed again as a brown belt or purple belt, and yeah. That's been about it. Competition hasn't really been a big part of my
Hmm.
career.
Hmm.
I've been up in Oregon, and when I started, I was the only jiu-jitsu school here.
Okay.
So there were no tournaments in
Hmm.
existence. For me to compete, I had to go to LA.
Hmm.
And I've always had kids. So I have had 2 little kids in my first marriage that I was supporting, and it just was never a priority for me.
Hmm.
And I don't particularly enjoy it, but it was positive for me to experience it, and but it was never a motivating factor for me. And the idea of doing jujitsu to compete in tournaments never even crossed my mind when I started jujitsu, because like I said, there weren't even tournaments. So what's always motivated me about jujitsu was learning the truth about fighting. In fact, the only reason I started teaching at all was to create training partners for myself. That initially was my motivation, right?
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And you've achieved a huge thing, creating this tribe, this tribe with one vibe all over the world. It's just amazing. So now, what would be the next step for you? Because I remember on one podcast you say that was your dream when you sat. I don't know. You sat one day and you said, "I will create an environment where I can train," and then
Yeah.
you created all over the world. So, what would be the next step for you?
For me, continuing to help the other coaches in my organization thrive and do well. I have a book I've been working on that I want to get published, and I've been focused the last few years a little more on writing.
Hmm.
So for me personally, applying some more energy to my writing and helping the other gym owners and coaches within our organization do well and continue to pass along jujitsu to the best of my ability are the 2 things that kind of keep me motivated.
Okay. What can we expect to have you in France someday? What is, because
Absolutely.
1986, that was too long ago.
Yeah, no, I'm 100%. It's interesting. I think I told you, but my first ever overseas seminar, anywhere outside the United States, was Reunion Island, where
That was the
no one
first
speaks
ever.
English.
Okay.
Yeah, ever. And that there almost no one there spoke English. Everybody spoke Creole or French.
Okay.
And I loved it. And every time I would go, I think I went there 5 or 6 times. I don't remember, but every time I would go, I would have usually at least 1 day layover in Paris.
Oh.
And on one of those trips, I actually stayed a week in Paris just because I wanted to see the city, and I loved it. So I'd be happy to come back.
Oh, that's great. That's a good news because, well, Jiu-Jitsu is now also growing fast here in the community, but wow, we need something also with great fundamentals. I'm actually training in a competitive environment, so there are so many different things going out of there, but we don't speak much about your association. I don't see it anywhere, so I believe that's something it would be great to hear also, and to have you.
One day, hopefully, we'll have an SBG in France.
Yes, yes. So, this is a wonderful talk. So I don't know if you have. Oh yes, let me ask you this question, which is of yours. If there was a point in which you believe to be true against most of the people, even would make them disagree, would make them angry against you, what would be that point? That is your question.
Yeah, I can see that you've been reading my stuff.
Everything.
Yeah, that is a good question. The problem with me is I have so many of those things, and
Okay, you
I have a
can
fiduciary
name it three, maybe three of them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to get me in trouble because I might have everybody mad at me. But I will say this. I do like that question because whether I agree with people or don't agree with people, I like talking to people and listening to people who have something different to say that you don't usually hear anywhere else in the media or in the mainstream media, even if it's really controversial. Even if I disagree, I should say, even more if I disagree with it.
Okay.
I find it even more interesting. And so not only are those the kind of people that I like to listen to, those are often the kinds of people I like to associate with, just so that I can challenge my own belief systems constantly and be exposed to ideas that might not otherwise run into. So I value the question a lot.
Okay, I understand, but can you tell us 1 or 2 points?
Let me think here. Let me see if I can find something.
At least one.
At least one, okay. I'll give you one example.
Okay.
I was listening to and reading a conversation people were having about voting in America, and one of the people on the thread were talking about how, which is a very common thing, people say, well, there's just a lot of dumb people that are voting, and that's the problem. And my response to that is, I've traveled all across America. I've had the privilege of being able to travel all over the world, but also to most of the states in America. And American people as a whole, just like human beings as a whole around the world, are good, decent people who are relatively intelligent. And we have to choose, usually as Americans, among people who aren't necessarily the best representatives of our population, because the best representatives of our population aren't always the ones that run for public office, which is, I think, very common around the world. And the response to that was, and what most people tend to say after that is, yeah, we need to get more people voting. And I think a lot of people believe that, and my opinion is actually the opposite.
Okay.
My opinion is people who vote should be people who have spent enough time thinking about the particular subjects that we're voting on to have an opinion that would be worth expressing. So, very often, for example, I'll get these ballots in Oregon where we vote on different propositions. Do I want this particular tax to be raised, or do I want this law to go into effect or not? To be honest with you, 90% of the time, I have no idea. I haven't read anything about those. I don't know one way or the other. So if I was going to answer that question, I would have to answer it based solely on ideology, whether I think government should be bigger or smaller or whatever, which I don't want to do, or just fill in a dot. So 9 times out of 10, I don't vote on those propositions at all. Now, theoretically, I should be more informed of my local government and pay more attention to what's going on so I can vote. I right now have not been doing that, don't have the time to do that. But what I'd like to see is a more educated populace that only really votes or expresses their opinion on one issue or another after having read quite a bit about that particular issue.
What's going on? Okay.
And getting a bunch of 18-year-olds, for example, who are fresh out of high school and may not understand what it's like to work full-time or to start a business or to have not lived in the world long enough to really know much about any of these issues other than what they've been indoctrinated with from government schools, isn't necessarily, I think, the way to move forward. And that would be a fairly controversial opinion in the United States, where everybody thinks we got to get everybody voting.
Has to vote, yes.
Yeah.
The city of democracy. So one is good. It's good. Maybe if you have a second, but otherwise, if you have any words to say.
I would leave it at that, and I would thank you for the conversation. And anybody
awesome.
that
thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much, and it was great. Thank you very much.
And you're welcome. And let me know when this goes up, and we'll put it out on our social media. And for anybody that wants to find out more about the gym, they can go to straightblastgym.com, which is our worldwide organization. Or if they want to read more of my own writing that may not necessarily be all about martial arts, they can go to mattthornton.org.
Okay. Perfect. Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right. You
Bye.
too. Stay safe.
Okay.